Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. Sorry, the new Gemara on the bottom, Daf Chav Vav Amud Beis. The previous Mishnah enumerated 9 kohanim who are involved in bringing the korban tamid from the time that they bring up the Eivarim on the Kevesh and onwards. Our Mishnah, in contrast, speaks about not only a lamb, which is talking about a korban tamid, but other oilos that are of an ayil or a par, which is our bigger animals requiring more kohanim. The Mishnah goes on to say that's talking about a korban sibur, but a korban yachid. Indeed, the bailin can choose the kohen, and he can perform all the avodas himself. Finally, the Mishnah states at the end, Hifshitam v'nituchan shel elu ve'elu shavin. Both the hefshet, the flaying of the skin of the korban oila, as well as the nituach, cutting it into various pieces, that is shavin, whether it's a korban sibur or korban yachid. Says the Gemara Tana, it's taught in the Brisa, Hifshitam v'nituchan shavin bizar. The Brisa adds, it's talking about that they're shavin. In which way are they equal, the hefshet and the nituach? That they're equal, whether it's a korban sibur or korban yachid, that they can both be performed with a zar, a non-kohen. They can do the acts of hefshet and nituach. Omar Chizkiya said, Minayin lehefshet v'nituach sheshava bizar. Where do I know that indeed a non-kohen can perform these acts of hefshet v'nituach? Shenemar brings a posuk, V'nosnu b'nei Aaron hakohen eish ala mizbeach, that the children of Aaron, the kohanim, they put eish on the mizbeach, a fire on the mizbeach with the wood. Nesinas eish boy kehuna, hefshet v'nituach loy boy kehuna. From here we learn, why did the Torah have to mention now the kohanim? It must be that only from that point do they have to go ahead and have the kohanim involved. When they actually put the eish on the mizbeach, on the wood, and put the fire on. But prior to that, the heshed and the nituach can be done by a non-kohen. On top of Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, the Gemara challenges Chizkiya's limud and says, "Hai mi boy legufe." We need that pasuk of v'nosnu b'nei Aaron hakohen eish al mizbeach for itself, because since it's not an essential component of getting a kapara, therefore, we may think that the kohanim do not need to do that. On that, the Torah has to emphasize that we do indeed have the kohanim perform that as well. But we would not have a limud, a diuk, to say that prior to that, the hefshet nituach can be done by a non-kohen. Omar Rav Simi bar Ashi, Ashkachte le'Abaye, dehave masbar le lebrei. He said, I found Abaye who was explaining to his son, which would be the answer to explain Chizkiya's limud. He begins with a brisa from Torah's Kohanim. It says in the brisa, V'shochat, the Torah says, and he shall shecht shchita bezar keshera. A non-kohen can do the shchita. V'chi me'ayin ba. So why would we think otherwise? Says the Gemara, says the brisa, Michlal shenemar, Ve'ata ubanecha iticha tishmu es kunaschem. The pasuk goes on to say, "L'kol devar hamizbeach," that in all matters of the mizbeach, the kohanim have to be shomer. Shomei ani afilu shchita. I might hear from this verse that even the shchita also must be performed by the kohanim. Talmud loymar v'shochat as ben habakar lifnei Hashem v'hikrivu bnei Aaron hakohanim as hadom. Mikabola ve'elach mitzvahs kuhuna. From the fact that it says v'shochat as ben habokar lifnei Hashem, it says that he shall shech the animal before Hashem, and then it says in the verse v'hikrivu bnei Aaron hakohanim as hadom. From the then onwards, after the shechita mentions the kohanim, so we learn from there mikabola ve'elach, from receiving the dam, including then the holacha, bringing the dam to the mizbeach, and then the zrikas hadam on the mizbeach, that has to be done by the kohen. But the shechita, the first part of the avodas hadam, that can be done by a non-kohen. V'somach yodoi, and therefore when the pasuk before says v'somach yodoi v'shochat, and goes on to say v'shochat, so now we learn from this limud that refers to the same person, even a non-kohen. Just like the bailim is somech yodoi, he does smicha. So from this limud, we can learn out that also the shochat can be done by the Bailim even if it's a non-Kohen. Limeid ala shchita shekishero bezar. Ad kan the Brisa and Torah's Kohanim. Now Abaye explains to his son, Michti, let us see now, Mikabola ve'elach mitzvahs kahuna. From now onwards, from the Kabbalah and onwards, is the mitzvah of the Kohanim bedavka. V'nasnu b'nei Aaron lamali. So why does it say then v'nasnu b'nei Aaron? If it indeed, it means then that from the Kabbalah ve'elach is the Kohanim, then of course putting the fire on the Mizbech would also have to be done by the Kohanim. Why does it have to mention specifically v'nasnu b'nei Aaron HaKohen? Why does it have to mention the Kohanim now? Says Abaye, Elamai must be limiute hefshe minituach. It must be to exclude hefshe minituach, and therefore Abaye comes to explain. We're using Abaye to explain what Chizkiah came to say before, that the non-kohen could go ahead and perform hefshe minituach, because the pasuk goes on to say v'nasnu b'nei Aaron hakohen, to teach me that only then the kohanim have to be involved. The Gemara now challenges this and asks, "V'akati itztrich," but we need this pasuk of "Nasnu b'nei Aaron hakohen" for something else, and therefore we can't use it like you're saying. You might have thought to say that Kivan the lav avoida me'akva kaparahi loti boy kahuna. Since it's not an avoida that is ma'akev a kapara, it doesn't bring atonement. The ikar avoida is the zrikas hadam. So therefore, by merely just putting the fire on the mizbeach is not an essential component, whereby I might think it does not require kahuna. Kamash malan de boy kahuna. Indeed, we are taught from this pasuk that it requires the kahuna. So therefore, we no longer have a limud, says the Gemara from here, that hefshe v'nitur can be done by a non-kohen. Ella, says the Gemara, mehacha, rather it's from a different pasuk. Ve'archu b'nei Aaron hakohanim es hanesochim es haroish ves hapoder. It states over here that the b'nei Aaron, the kohanim, they arrange the parts of the animal. Michti, let us see now. Mikabala ve'elach mitzvahs kuna. We proved before that from the Kabbalah Saddam and onwards is done by the kuhuna bedavka. So then when it says va'archu lamali, that they arranged the limbs on the mizbeach, so why is it that have to be told that? We already know that mikan ve'elach, from the Kabbalah, mikan ve'elach is the kuhuna. Elamai must be lemuute hefshe minituach. Must be coming to teach me that this comes to exclude hefshe minituach. The hefshe minituach could yes be done by a non-kohen, which is an avodah before. The Gemara asks, but the previous verse speaks about the 2 logs of wood that must be put onto the pyre. Maybe it's coming to then say that a non-kohen can put those 2 logs of wood on the pyre and doesn't have to be done by a kohen. The Gemara says no, because mistabra divcha de kavose mimayit. It's mistabra to say that a carbon, that itself is coming to be excluded, and therefore, and not to exclude shnei gezirei eitzim. It's not more mistaber that which we're involved with to then speak about that as the exclusion. The Gemara says no, adarabba sido de kavasim imayit. Since we're talking about arranging, so the arrangement of the shnei gezirei eitzim is something that is mistaber also, and even more mistaber to exclude. The Gemara says lo salke daitach. I don't need to think that that's coming to be excluded, because the Omar Mar v'hikri v'akoyin es hakol. Pasuk goes on to say v'hiktir hamizbecha zu holeches al evar nekevish. We learned over here from this pasuk that the bringing of the evarim to the kevesh is done by the kohanim. Holeches evar nekevish hu de boy kahuna. That is what's required by the kahuna. Holeches eitim loy baikuna, but bringing the wood, that does not require the kahuna. But the diuk is hasider shnei gezirei eitim baikuna. Whereas the 2 logs that are put onto the pyre in the afternoon, that is required to be by the kahuna. So the Gemara now asks va'archo lamali. So why do we then have that previous pasuk va'archoi? Lemeute hefshe v'nituach, to exclude that does not have to be done by a kohen, that can be done by a zar. a non-kohen can perform hevshet v'nituach. So l'chor we have our limud. The Gemara now again asks, Ve'ema hochi nami legufe. Maybe this pasuk va'arachu itself is necessary, as the Gemara will explain later on towards the bottom of the Amud, that we need it for itself and therefore cannot be learned to teach me hefshet v'nituach can be done by ezar. Ella, rather, must be the following pasuk: V'hiktir hakoyen es hakol l'may asa. Why do we need the pasuk that the koyen is maktir everything? On that, the Gemara answers, you're right, that would be superfluous. We already know that the kohen is maktir on the mizbech because we already learned from before that the kahuna has to be then involved in the avodah, and this would be then certainly included. Elamai, why does it mention v'hiktir hakohen es hakol l'mi'ute hefshet v'nituach, to exclude hefshet v'nituach that does not have to be done by the kohen? Even a zar, non-kohen, can perform hefshet v'nituach. And now we found our verse. The Gemara now speaks out the previous verses, what we're learning from them. V'hikriv hakohen es hakol, and the pasuk says v'hiktir hamizbecha zu holeches evorim lekevesh. This teaches me that the evorim of the korban must be brought onto the kevesh, onto the ramp by the kohanim. Holeches evorim lekevesh hu de boy kahuna. That's required by the kahuna. Holeches eitzim loy boy kahuna. But to put the eitzim stam, that would not be required by the kahuna. The Gemara then is medayik ha gezire sidur shnei gezire eitzim boy kahuna. But the two logs that have to be put on the pyre of the mizbeach in the afternoon, just like indeed the morning, there's one kohen who puts on the two logs on the pyre. In the afternoon, even though it doesn't state befeirush, we learn from this diuk that two kohanim put the two logs on the mizbeach, on the pyre, in the afternoon. V'nasnu legufe. And v'nasnu is taught for itself, that we would need to know that the kohanim are performing this, because without that, we might think, since it's not essential to the kapar, as the Gemara mentioned before, I might think kohanim do not need to perform v'nasnu. On that, the v'nasnu does teach me that they have to perform the fire on the mizbeach, on the eitzim, and arrange it, has to be done by the kahuna. Ve'archu, and the pasuk that we just brought before, ve'archu, what does that come to teach me? Shnayim, it says in plural too. Bnei Aaron, and the same pasuk says also Bnei Aaron, it's also Shnayim too. HaKohanim, also plural, Shnayim. So altogether we have two, and two, a total of 6. Lomanu tle sheton shisha. From here we have a remez, an allusion, that the tle, which is referring to the korban tamid, that needs 6 kohanim to go ahead and bring up the evarim on the kevesh. Rav Hamnuna, kasha le Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar had a kasha with this drasha that 6 are needed to bring the tle onto the kevesh. Why? Because hai ben habakar ksiv uben habakar esim va'ar boy boy. This pasuk that you just said va'archu, it's referring to indeed the bakar, and the bakar, the ben bakar, requires, as the Mishnah states, 24 kohanim. So he had a problem with this. On that, he comes to answer his own question, v'neichale. He comes to explain why it is indeed a good allusion to the korban tamid, to the tle, because it says al ha'etzim. I'll read the pasuk. The pasuk begins v'archu b'nei Aaron hakoyin hanisachim es harosh v'es hapoder al ha'etzim asher al ha'esh asher al ha'mizbeach. So the fact that it says Allah eitim asher eish asher mizbeach, which we already know from the previous verse, the previous pasuk, already tells us that you're supposed to put them on the mizbeach. So why is it mentioned here? Ezu davar shenemar bo eitim eish mizbeach. Why is it emphasizing that you have to put eitim eish mizbeach on top of chav zayin amid beis? Hevei omer zetle. This comes to tell me that it's talking about the korban tamid, which is the first korban in the morning, and therefore the korban tamid, which is brought with a 1-year-old keves, a tle. This is the remez that 6 kohanim are necessary to bring the evarim onto the kevesh, onto the ramp.